press record as well. And now I've pressed record. I'm not going to say exactly the same things again, but I'll welcome everybody to the event we do in Bournemouth University International Centre for Tourism and Hospitality Research that focuses on London and how we can reignite life in London, rebuilding life, communities and economies, and with my good colleague and friend Adele Ladkin and our guest Tony Matharu from the Integrity International Group, the Central London Alliance, the Blue Orchid Hotels, and several other things that Tony will be talking to us about. And then Rob Paterson from Best Western Hotels in the UK. So welcome everybody. Let me say a particular welcome to you, Tony, and I'm really grateful for all your support and your partnership for so many years. And it's wonderful to engage with you again and look into how London can rebuild after the COVID disaster. And I would like to welcome you to take the floor and explain your experience and show some of the projects that you have done and your leadership that's very admirable that you have been, and all the projects that you've been leading in the last year. Tony.
Thank you very much, Dimitrios, and thank you everybody for turning up on this in this afternoon. It's a sunny afternoon in London. I believe it's mornings for you somewhere else, for those people who are from different continents. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And I'm delighted and privileged to be here today to tell you a little bit about my experience in a crisis. This is probably the biggest crisis that I've felt in my many years in hospitality and tourism, for many reasons. So let's place ourselves in context here. This pandemic has had severe impact on lives, on hospitalization, and we have to consider that. This is not just an economic situation. If I cough a little bit, it's nothing to do with COVID. Unfortunately, I've not had that. But I've got a bit of a tickly throat, so excuse me if I do splutter a bit. Sharing is caring, and one thing that we do know is that every individual in the world is now connected to another. We are all connected to each other. Each business is connected to a range of different others, suppliers, employees, clients, and so on. This pandemic has affected everywhere, and I was grateful for Dimitrios to be talking about support, partnership, engagement, and rebuilding, because actually we all need to support each other. We do need to partner, we do need to engage, we do need to rebuild, and that's individually and it's collectively in our businesses, and it's probably in other parts of our lives too. So lives have been lost, hospitalization has increased. Finances have been really, really stretched. The costs have been personal, they've been governmental, they've been global, and livelihoods have suffered, particularly those who have been disproportionately impacted. And hospitality is one of those sectors, and travel and leisure and tourism disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. London even more so. But if we start with just the hospitality sector in the UK, in 2020, just in the last year, we have suffered 53.3 billion pounds of loss. That's a very significant sum. If you just take the Q3 of last year, there were 88 million less visitors to the UK. 43% of the outlets that closed are not going to reopen. Yet there are some positive signs. 68% of consumers say that the hospitality venues that they have visited, they will look forward to doing so again. 40% of consumers say their experience in the hospitality sector exceeded their expectations, despite the pandemic and the social distancing and the other constraints and restrictions that they've had. Only 4% found that there were shortcomings. So the perception of the hospitality sector and leisure and travel is perhaps quite different from the reality. And if we just distill it down to London and TfL and the Underground, we were chatting before we went live about the perception of London Underground, the public transport system. The reality is that despite Imperial College conducting objective research and all the touch points, the handrails, the Oyster card points, the density of air, they haven't found a single case of COVID-19 in the public transport system. Yet there's a perception that perhaps it's unsafe, and therefore there needs to be a reassurance and a restabilization of confidence in the market. But hospitality has suffered. It's suffered disproportionately because we are so dependent on travel and mobility. We suffer more because of the nature of our industry and social distancing and live connectivity, events and so on have been disrupted. People are not back to workplace, and we depend on the corporate market and so on. Attractions and venues have had to close, and these are all been really detracting from our ability to trade. And that's irrespective of the fact that hotels and hospitality have been asked in many cases to close, and therefore they're not being able to trade. A lot of suffering, worse than I've experienced in 3 different recessions heretofore. But we have been diligent in the hospitality sector. We've been respectful. Nobody has been particularly reckless. And what's more, that's been valued by consumers. Whether it's been valued by the government and for those in power is a different matter. And there are many people who would argue that we've been disproportionately impacted by the lack of positive response from central government, local government, and other authorities that should have been in a better position to respond proactively to help those organisations, those businesses, those sectors, and those destinations, particularly capital cities, and in my case, London, that have been disproportionately impacted. So when we look at London, there's some other statistics before I go into what the nature of this crisis has meant to me. So the central activity zone in London is very significant. When London starts to falter and fail, the rest of the UK economy does too. We generate, just in the central activity zone, over £211 billion of gross value added. We employ over 1.9 million people. We contribute £4.6 billion just in business rates. Basically, we perform and we hit above our weight. The money that's utilised in providing services, including education, healthcare, transport and other services across the country, is very largely dependent on this very small area, 0.01% of the UK's land area, but producing over 11% of the total UK economy. So we are very significant. We punch above our weight. We've been disproportionately impacted, and the hospitality sector in London has been even more disproportionately affected. So what happens in a crisis? And my experience has been recessions elsewhere, other times, but in London, this crisis has been quite different. But nevertheless, it does bear the traits of other crises that I've experienced. So there was a tsunami that people might remember that affected Asia, India, Sri Lanka, and elsewhere in the South Asia region. And people thought this is bad, isn't it? It's bad for them over there. They underestimated the impact. The typical reaction on crises, as with them, as with earthquakes, as with floods and natural disaster, even war and the aftermath of war, is the first reaction is denial. It's bad, but it really doesn't affect me. And there's a denial that it exists. In this case, in the pandemic, there was a denial across the world. There was a denial at government level. There was a denial globally. There was a denial locally. There was a denial individually that this was going to impact on us as individuals, as companies, as organizations, as local authorities, as governments across the globe. So that tsunami, that earthquake response from a crisis was very, very evident in the start of the pandemic. The next phase after denial is a bit of hibernation. We all knuckle down, we hide from this trouble. And some people react in a different way and they get busy. we've got to do something. What should we do? But that's another phase post a crisis. The third thing that happens is then there's a period of adjustment. I would say that we're in a period of adjustment now. People are wondering what they should do. They've furloughed their staff. They've now moved their education onto online. There are all kinds of adjustments to businesses, to people's lives, livelihoods, what they're doing individually and collectively. And so they go through this period of adjustment that we're in now. And then beyond that, if we get it right, and if, it's a big if we work collaboratively and in partnership, then we can rebuild and recover. And that's where we need to be in the very near future. And I'm trying to stimulate that recovery as far as central London is concerned. So what did I do at the beginning of the crisis? The first thing is, having experience and having set up charities and been involved in other activities, I went to the disastrous area post the tsunami. I went for hours and hours and hours, 5 or 6 hours traveling by car. I could see the bombed out, what looked like bombed out buildings and the disaster of a tsunami. You couldn't be in denial. In fact, in our mind's eye, when a disaster, an earthquake happens, or a tsunami happens, we can only see a sort of a camera sweep of a couple of miles. Imagine a BBC camera spanning the disaster zone. That's all that we can see in our mind's eye. What we're not prepared in the human mind is to appreciate actually the scale of mile after mile after mile after mile for hour upon hour of bombed out buildings. And I replicate that because of this pandemic. We didn't understand that it was going to go so long, so deep, and impact us so much. So my first reaction, having responded to the tsunami, having responded to earthquakes, where in Nepal, for example, my first reaction wasn't to run away, wasn't to deny, wasn't to hibernate, but actually was to wonder what we should do, because there are going to be victims and there's going to be people who are disproportionately affected. And what can we do? What do we have the ability to do to help those most seriously afflicted? So what did I do? I set up something called Here to Help London, which was a community project where we decided that those people who are the most vulnerable needed help, whether elderly or young, whether they were dispossessed, whether there were students that were being thrown out of their digs because they happened to be from Southeast Asia, whether there were people who were isolated, there were people who needed to be self-isolating, there were people who couldn't go back to their families because they were doctors or working in care and they didn't want to go back and infect people. So I set up Here to Help London as a response, and that gained a lot of traction. Just in my own little world, in a relatively small private hotel company, we provided over 5,000 complimentary room nights. We provided over 30,000 meals to those people who were key workers and others that needed help. It seemed to me bizarre that at a time that the nation, and in particular London, was feeling very, very vulnerable, that actually what was happening was people were effectively closing their doors, shutting their businesses, stopping the supply chain, laying off staff, whereas I try to keep our staff going to try and respond to those that I thought were in need. Obviously, that was the case, but I didn't anticipate that it would be as long and as far-reaching as it has been. So what did I do thereafter? I realized that we can't do things individually. And actually what we need to do is to collaborate, but there was no voice for London. London's businesses generally, London's population, from central government, from local government, from the mayor, there was a silence and nobody was occupying that vacuum. So I set up a community interest company to respond to that, which meant that it had a particular purpose. The purpose was quite specific. It was to help London, Londoners and livelihoods of Londoners and others that visit it to survive and recover. As a community interest company, that is its remit. It can't spend its money or anything else, doing anything else other than that for the purpose. It's like a charity to that extent, to respond to that vacuum. And there were 3 strands of work that we identified. The first thing was public policy and advocacy. We needed to get to number 10, number 11, the Treasury, the Secretary of State for Health. We needed to get to people who could make decisions that were going to impact lives and make sure that they were aware of how severe an impact this was having, either on our sector or on London or on the UK economy more widely. And the fact that we're now the recipient of inquiries from all of those I've just previously named, whenever there's a policy decision or a change in policy, the fact that they consult with us and that they use people from CLA and other of our partners in order to voice a response means that we've gone a long way in a very short space of time. I'm not going to say that VAT or business rate relief and freezing of that, an extension of furlough and so on were down to CLA. It certainly wasn't that. But we were amplifying the voices of many others that were trying to say those things, but were perhaps not being heard in that vacuum of noise.
Tony, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
And first of all, invite Chris Crampton, who has managed to come on board, and I'm grateful. And I'm sorry for the Zoom registration problems. And actually, I'd like to bring Rob into the discussion as well to see how Best Western is a very different property from yours. You are the Blue Orchid is running 3 hotels for the time being, and I know that of your plans to expand. And your leadership has been remarkable by helping all these people that they're on the first line. The level of solidarity and humanity that you personally and your company has showed is remarkable. And I think it's a fantastic showcase to the world. I'd like to bring Rob as well and to talk about how Best Western has actually dealt with the situation. And I know that he has got some numbers as well of about what happened in London and the UK in general, and to see where are we in terms of the disaster that we've seen behind us, and then start moving towards the future. Rob?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Listening to Tony, it's almost like we're in parallel universes, and we had a very similar situation right at the beginning of the crisis, and I can relate entirely to the denial piece, and then this realization that there's this really significant crisis on our doorstep that we thought would last a couple of months, and we come out the other side of it, and here we are. 12 months, more than 12 months down the line, and still talking about our road to recovery. I can also relate. I happened to be in Bangkok when that tsunami hit, Tony, so I can relate to that, and flew down to Phuket, and you know, there are some parallels there. But Best Western very early in the piece took a position, and very publicly took a position that we wanted to support the NHS through the crisis. So it was a Sunday morning. Andrew Marr had Matt Hancock on the television program, and he was talking about how he was going to deal with the forecasts of requirements for hospital beds was far surpassing what the capacity was, and he'd asked the question of Matt Hancock, how are you going to deal with this? And he said, well, we're going to commandeer hotels, and we'll turn them into care facilities. And it was at that moment, there was one of my very talented team members who looks after our comms sent me a text and said, hey, listen, why don't we offer up our rooms to the NHS? And within about 20 minutes, he'd written a press release. We put it out to the Press Association, and every major outlet in the country had picked it up within about 15 minutes of it hitting the Press Association. So, and that sort of set the path for our entire crisis. It's such a defining moment, just a simple text message. I said, yeah, go for it, do it. And it changed the course of our entire crisis. And what happened from there was that somebody got in touch with me from a major sustainable development fund in London, and a bunch of hoteliers as well, saying, look, let's band ourselves together. And we formed an NGO, so a not-for-profit organisation, same as what Tony was talking about, to support the NHS. And that organisation still continues today, and we still have 2 calls a week, talking about how we're going to continue to support the NHS for the next 5 years, because there is, or even 10 years, because there's a significant backlog of things like cancer treatment, all sorts of elective surgeries that have been put off and postponed. There's an enormous backlog, and there's just not enough capacity in their health in the health world to be able to deal with that. So that continues to today. It set our course. We formed this NGO. We found ourselves on phone calls with Number 10, talking about how we could support that, and we converted a number of our hotels. I mean, it seems like a simple thing, and you put out a press release, and then you realise that there's a whole lot of fire regulations that goes with. There's a whole lot of medical requirements, of course. Naturally, if you're going to store drugs or you're going to have needles or whatever it might be, we're just not geared for that. And it was an incredibly complex project, but that was our immediate response to it. The collateral, Tony, I think, is quite well explained the economic collateral, but I think now hospitality is in a position to be the foundation of the recovery, and not just with economically, but socially and culturally. We're the place that people come to meet and sit down and mingle with their family or with their friends. And what's been missed so much over the last 12 months, what we really understand about sport now is that it's not the players on the pitch, it's the people in the stands who really make the event. And I think hospitality sits at the core now and has a really unique opportunity to be the springboard for the big recovery that lies in front of us. And that probably starts domestically, just purely from the scientific advice that we have is that we need to move slowly and do this safely. So we really are going to need a concerted effort in the domestic market to bring people back to cities. People, I think, are flocking back to coastal and rural locations, but cities really need a big drive, and London needs a really big drive to get people to come back and to sit in a theatre again, and to go to a sporting event again. And if that means we need to think outside the box or think about how we can make that COVID safe, I think we have to keep an open mind to that. There's been a lot of press about negative press about COVID certification, and you can understand one side of it, you can understand the other side of it, but the reality is, if that's what's going to be needed to make it safe to recover, I think we really need to keep an open mind to that and be that springboard. I think the last point that perhaps is a talking point for us is the amount of people we lost from the industry, and I'm talking about employees. It's been there's been a huge collateral of young workers who, fantastic people. Every company had it. We had it in our company as well. And it was really sad to have to say goodbye to a lot of people, really talented people. I think we have to put education and making hospitality a career at the center of this recovery. It's just so critical to our future, because we're going to need so much more talent coming through the industry, and it's such a fantastic industry to be a part of. It's had a tough time, but it's so resilient, and there's such a bright future for us.
Thank you very much, Rob. Absolutely, and a lot of our students who are with us, and students from other universities or recent graduates, they are in that kind of position where they like to come back and be part of the industry and help the recovery and taking London forward. Let me also welcome Chris Crampton from Red Elephant and the chair of PATA UK to say a word and see how he has experienced the crisis both in the UK and also in all the different countries that PATA is engaging with. Chris, you are here?
Yes, I'm here. Yes. I was listening
to have you with you.
Likewise, I was listening to that and thinking how true it was that we didn't appreciate quite what was coming. And I think there's a reality for an awful lot of businesses that, had they known that we'd be talking about a year or more, they probably wouldn't have hunkered down and tried to survive. I think we would have lost a lot more if we'd known how long it was going to take before we started coming out of it. So everybody was kind of thinking at the time, it could be a couple of months, it could be more. And then we were hoping for September last year, and then it wasn't. And now we're hoping for September this year. So there's an awful lot of sunk cost for businesses and for promotional organizations in terms of where we are. I suppose when I'm kind of looking forward about how we get through this, the degree of losses that are stored up for the next couple of years is perhaps the biggest concern as we start to recover and as we hope to get out of this and hope to see some kind of return of business. I think one of the things that we probably noticed, certainly within Pater as an organisation, was a clear differential between who was particularly affected and who wasn't. The young were certainly disproportionately and continue to be disproportionately hurt by this, and we saw some of the news today that it was a very high percentage of the job losses were 35s and unders. But we also saw it with some of the small businesses versus the large businesses. The domestic policy, as far as this country was concerned, meant that those who were self-employed running small businesses got very little support. And there was a degree of desperation that you could see amongst them as against those who were just working from home, and it didn't particularly seem to personally affect them. So it's been quite divisive in that sense. There's a difference between those who've been really, really heavily hit and those who perhaps not quite so much. And some frustration on both sides as not necessarily seeing the perspective. Now, as far as the UK is concerned, the point about the cities is really important. I mean, people are thinking about saying that we might have a domestic tourism summer, and as far as the coasts are concerned, that might be the case. But I think it was Oxford Street that has something like 50% of footfall and 75% of spend is foreign tourists, and losing inbound tourism in terms of what it does to the UK economy is a real problem and a real concern that I'm not necessarily sure that everybody in government and authority realizes. Now, the situation abroad can be even worse. It's around 10% of our economy in this country is geared towards tourism, both inbound and outbound, something like 4 million jobs. But if you go to some destinations, Thailand is well over 20% of their economy, and they're effectively closed down. It's except with some domestic to try to maintain things going ahead. And in other destinations, some of the island destinations, it can even be 70, 80%. So when we come to the whole question of the morality of opening and the risk of COVID, it's a very much a balanced position. To sort of say it's to be COVID, to restrict due to COVID, but there are some destinations where that is quite literally condemning people to serious poverty if we don't have it. So I think what we would look at and what we would hope to see is a balance between the competing challenges and the competing health challenges as well as anything else. And I think perhaps as a travel industry, something that we haven't been globally particularly great at over the years is explaining how we benefit society, how as an industry it's not a bad way of lifting people out of poverty in many countries and many destinations. That's probably something that we could do better in the years ahead as we face the various challenges about sustainable tourism and as it returns. And I suppose the last thing I would say, that when I look at it in terms of where we are this year and where we will be in 2022, is that we see a lot of reports saying along the lines of how travel won't recover until 2024, 25, 26, or whatever it might be. And it's not really how I look at it. I look at if 2021 is better than 2020, that's a start. And if 2022 is better than 21, that's a start too. We are facing a smaller, more localized industry than we have done in quite some years. And we have to accept that and deal with it. And there's not much point wailing and complaining about what we have lost. It's about what we can produce in future.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people, back to what Tony was saying, a lot of people are still in denial, and they don't really see COVID at the right kind of dimension. I know that Adele had a couple of questions that said that she would like to ask you guys, and I know that we would like to go towards the future as well. Adele?
thank you, Dimitrios, and Tony, Rob and Chris. That's been really interesting. In fact, I was listening so intently, I almost forgot I was co-chairing there. So thank you for kicking it off to a real start. One of the things that all three of you mentioned was employment and sort of collateral damage. And this is quite dear to my heart, as labour and employment issues is one of my main research areas. And I guess what I'm wondering is, for those people who have been fortunate enough to keep their jobs, or for those who will, as we know, in the future be recruited, will the employment landscape look quite different? I mean, are we expecting to see any changes post-COVID? What are the opportunities, or what are the skills that we might be looking for? So do you see any significant changes when we start to be able to recruit people again?
Well, the first thing, thanks Adele, the first thing to say perhaps is that it depends on what the context will be. If people don't return to their workplace as offices, then there's going to be less demand for hospitality and dry cleaners and coffee bars and cobblers and theatres and attractions and so on. So and now on a broader level, just looking at it in that way, we need to get the industry to recover, and that would stimulate demand for their services, meetings and so on, that will then encourage the hospitality sector to then take the risk of re-employing people, returning people who have perhaps been on furlough. And that really is only a temporary measure. And furlough was simply I think it was an employee benefit. It really didn't help businesses particularly. In fact, it cost businesses to put people on furlough, not as much as it would otherwise, but it delayed the time that they've got to make those decisions. So the decision making has got to be based on how businesses forecast the recovery. And that's where I think that individually and collectively we've got a role to play, that we need to be in partnership and collectively working together to try to stimulate a recovery. And as has been mentioned, that post the credit crunch crisis, it was the hospitality sector in the United Kingdom that started the recovery, and it will be even now. You've seen it even after the non-essential retail was open. Actually, it was the hospitality sector that's encouraging people to come out and to re-engage with each other. So it is the foundation of recovery. I think that's in a broader sense. Perhaps I'll leave other people to talk about the specifics of what they're going to do in terms of encouraging their employees or other employees to join them. But certainly technology is going to be an important part. From my point of view, I've invested in a technology company, and that is going to help and assist people who are remote working in a way that I wouldn't have done pre this crisis.
Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, I'd echo what Tony says there, is that, you know, with any crisis comes opportunity, and what's been really impressive to watch is the adoption of technology over the crisis, and whether that's at the hotel level, whether it's in the wider hospitality realm. And I mean, things like how we use kitchens today is incredible. How many hotels now are using their kitchen, offering 6 or 7 brands through Hungry House, Deliveroo, Uber Eats, whatever it might be. It's been phenomenal to watch the innovation that's come out of the hospitality industry to spawn new revenue streams. And some of those
sorry, a lot of can I stop you for a second? Because a lot of people do not understand what you are talking about. Can you please explain what you're talking about? Because we've got people from around the world.
Apologies. Yeah. So a lot of from first-hand experience, I can only speak to the experience that we've had in Best Western. Many of our kitchens were designed to service weddings and events and conferences, and of course all that stopped. And those hotels that are lucky enough to be in urban areas where deliveries are possible are now reopening their kitchens with their chefs, and they're putting out 6 or 7 different menus, maybe a vegan menu, maybe a chicken menu, maybe a pizza menu, hamburgers, whatever it might be. And then they're putting those onto apps for home delivery. And they'll put them across multiple apps. And you know, there's the average that we're getting at the moment is close to £5,000 a week of income, and that's a significant income in the urban hotels. So it's innovations, and I just use that as a small example because there are many examples of innovation in the industry, but it's been fantastic to watch people readapt their entire organizations to whether it's a local authority, whether it's something like I just explained, to spawn new revenue streams. And I think some of those things are not just going to stop when the crisis ends. They're going to continue for the long term. So, innovation around not just checking into a room or ordering a meal at the table, but going further into some of those more innovative revenue streams. There's going to be new opportunities to spawn out of that. And I think as we start to recover, there'll be more things that we haven't even thought of yet that will come. So I think hospitality is really resilient and innovative, and a crisis forces that innovation upon us. So it's an exciting time, I think, to enter hospitality.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And we were talking with Tony some time ago about some entrepreneurial kind of activity. Sorry, Adele, I could...
Do I have to manage you as well?
Yes, you have to. You know me. Sorry, Chris was coming in.
Yeah.
The one thing I was listening to that, and there was one thing I was thinking is I am sadly old enough to remember in the early 1990s how the rise of the internet was going to devastate employment across the whole of the travel and tourism sector, as everything was put online, and there wouldn't be any need for people because people would just go and do it all themselves. So I'm always slightly skeptical of massive shift being said that it's going to happen as though it's an automatic truth, because the travel sector over the next 25 years grew massively as demand increased. And I don't think that fundamentally the principles behind either hospitality or travel have changed in terms of what people want to do. But numbers are certainly going to be vastly smaller because there are so many people who are nervous and afraid even of going out. And which is always something that's for the people, depending on which side of it they are, the ones who don't see a particular problem on a personal level, and those who are very fearful and want to stay home, find it very hard to understand each other. But I don't think that those fundamentals in terms of what people want from their lives, in terms of their experiences, is changed. And I don't think that in terms of with that being the case, that it changes dramatically the employment opportunities within a particular industry, except that how it's done may be different, because depending on what the changes are in terms of our daily lives going forward. So an awful lot of those roles have gone over the last year. So the hope is that we have bottomed out at this point, and from now on, we start seeing some signs of improvement, which therefore means that there will be opportunities. So I agree with both of the others that there will be innovation, there will be something new, something different, and there will be employment opportunities within that. And that's possibly, as you always have when you have a major crisis, something really exciting happening, something really different and unusual coming along. That is a growth area, and that is very, very often the case that you have when you have a major crisis, and no doubt it's been a major crisis. But I would be positive. I would look forward to the future. It will get better from where we are now.
And I think you're absolutely right, Chris. And if you see how much conversation we had in the last year, and how much we've actually got together and we discuss very important things, even if we couldn't have the physical proximity, but we kind of create the digital proximity, and the initiatives that people have taken, like the London Central Alliance or the other initiative that Rob was talking about earlier, they would have not been happening without COVID. And I think this is the opportunity actually to take some of these initiatives forward to the next level. and help London, the UK, and the world in that manner progress and do all the great things that we're doing. Let's bring Tony back to talk about the London Central Alliance and what are the plans, who are the partners, and how it will help the redevelopment of the London life as we know and we love it.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity. Yes, and I think I mentioned that one strand of work that Central London Alliance was doing was advocacy and public policy. A second strand, which sort of Rob just touched on, was business support. So there's a whole range of business support. Initially, it was about providing downloading a risk assessment. You can go onto the Central London Alliance website, download a risk assessment template, so you can make sure that your businesses are ready. If you want them accredited formally, so that it's not sort of greenwash, Bureau Veritas, one of our partners, will accredit you and they will inspect and make sure that you are fit for purpose. That will give reassurance to your clients, your employees and others. The business support has broadened as our partnership has broadened. And it can be digital support through a platform called Optimizer, which is, I'll perhaps spend a moment on telling you about that, which has risen out of the crisis. But there are other support structures that provided media support, marketing support, employment support, landlord and tenant support. One of the big, we talked about stored up losses. And the reality is that those that are tenants, perhaps bars, restaurants, pubs, they haven't paid their landlords and they don't have to pay their landlords at the present time because there is an embargo on doing anything about it from the landlords. But that will change at some point in time. And the landlords will demand their arrears in rent and will be demanding their rent for the future and service charges and so on. And there may well not be the funds because reserves have dried up to be able to satisfy that. And then we're at a precipice where the tenants have to leave. There's broken window syndrome in those businesses, or the banks ask the landlords to repay their capital and interest, and the landlords turn around to the banks and say, we can't because our tenants haven't paid us. And then we're in a different scenario. So there is some stored up pain still to come. But there are, as has been explained, there are solutions. The solution that I suggested and that's come out of this is Optimizer, which is a digital product that enables remote working to happen much more effectively. So we've all got data, we store our data in different places, we've got different employees, we've got different data at different places. And this is a way in which we can manage our data better. That's sprung out of the fact that people are working remotely and they need access to information, and that has to be provided. That's just one example. On the third element of Central London Alliance was on a consumer campaign. So we created a consumer campaign. I urge you all to go onto londonloveaffair.com. If you go onto Central London Alliance or London Love Affair, you can download a toolkit, a playbook. You can utilize it. You can utilize all of the characteristics of it. As long as you sign up to CLA, it doesn't cost you anything, in order to nurture people back to what they remember as being positive of London. So the first sentiment of that is, the first iteration of that is sentimental. This is where I met the love of my life. This is where I let the world go by. This is where I celebrated my first transaction. This is where I met before X or Y. And so that imagery has now gone to about 14.5 million people through our partners, JC&Co, City AM, Bauer Radio and others, created by Central London Alliance to nurture people back to a positive thought, reassuring and confidence building for the future. The next iteration of that will be much more positive. It will be encouraging people to do. Obviously, we don't want to be seen as reckless, so we're not telling people to do anything yet. But at some point in time, people will be nudged back to their workplaces in greater numbers than they are now, or to visit attractions, or to go to events. It's already happening. It's slightly inconsistent, the noise at the moment, because my hairdressers and my spa are open, but my hotel is not. So somebody can have a hot stone massage or a beard trim, but they can't book a room in the hotel above it. It's all a bit extraordinary. The workers can go back and work as masseurs and nail technicians or hairdressers, but they can't go back to work making beds or providing services within a hotel. That will change because people are now back. And I think it needs a collaborative effect of all of those things that Central London Alliance is trying to nudge. Dimitrios asked about who's part of it. So the Corporation of the City of London are part of it and all their businesses. The London Chamber of Commerce and Industry with its 2,500 members are part of it. Various business improvement districts that vary from smaller ones, about 150 businesses to those in the thousands. The Westminster Business Council with 1,500 business members, and so on and so on. Together with private businesses, individual organizations that realize that we need their voice amplified. Cultural and sporting and other activities and attractions, they're all part of the Central London Alliance, because actually the fabric of London, it doesn't comprise of somebody going back to work at a desk or behind a bar or as a barrister. Actually, it's all of it together. We are interconnected, we're interrelated, we do collaborate, we need to cooperate. And the Central London Alliance is, as it says, an alliance of all those people who are interested and understand the agenda of trying to nudge a capital city, a global, world-leading capital city that punches above its weight, that has soft power and examples for the world to follow diplomatically in other ways, in its rule of law and the way in which we can innovate and be creative. We need to nudge that back out of denial and into and out of hibernation, through the adjustment phase, into recovery, and be just conscious of some of the lessons learned. Perhaps we'll leave that till later, and I'll nudge people into where I think the lessons can be learned from this. But I'm sure there are other people that want to contribute, Rob and Chris included.
Thank you very much, Tony. Rob?
Yeah, you know, we think about, I think Chris's point before about roles coming back. And I think when we think about what was lost during the crisis, it was really the frontline roles. And a lot of them, certainly in Best Western, were around events, conferences and events, because that was one of the things much earlier in the crisis that was identified as, look, this is going to be a while before this comes back. And I agree with the point that Chris made. If we knew at the start how long this was going to be, and you know, the size and the scale of what it was going to be, I think there would have been a very I agree, there would have been a very, very different outcome, because I think the banks have sort of looked at it, lenders have looked at it as, I'm just bridging a situation until we get to the other side. And that bridge has got longer and longer and longer and longer and bigger. And they're so vested now that it's absolutely true. But a lot of those roles that were lost were those frontline roles. And as we start to dabble our toes in the water on bringing those events back, a lot of those roles are going to come back, and they are the frontline roles. They're not technology, innovation, anything like that. They are just the frontline roles that will be absolutely required. And the area that we see the strongest pent-up demand is in the weddings market, because how many people in the last 12 months have put off their wedding or postponed their wedding, not been able to do it? It is incredible that the business on the books now for summer, even this year still, and summer next year for weddings, it's every single day, and people are banking them as well and having 2 weddings on a day in a venue. So there's an incredible pent-up demand, and that's going to need servicing with a lot of frontline staff. So I think there's a little bit to be optimistic on that front. And then if we take that a step further, you think about, we've all had a personal effect through this crisis where we've lost someone we know or is close to us, and that hasn't been really, to a normal extent, recognised or stamped as a. People, I think, will want to get out and celebrate the life of people who've passed through the crisis in a more normal way, because they've only been able to do it with 10 or 15 people there to do it. And there's been milestone birthdays that sit behind that, 50th, 40th, 60th, whatever it might be, anniversaries. And there's a huge pent-up demand. And I think there's a lot to be optimistic about just in the frontline pent-up demand that we have around employment, that we will see come back in droves when it can safely. And that's where I think we get to the certification, the COVID certification, where yeah, there's some certain issues, but I think with the COVID certification, we kind of do it already. You already have to have a yellow fever jab to go to certain parts of the world. You already have to show a PCR test to enter the UK even. And I think there is genuine merit in considering that. I think we have to keep an open mind about it. And that could be a big path back to some of those really significant employment gaps, because that's where the big losses came from.
Absolutely. And you see that I think a lot of what you were talking about, Rob, is what we call revenge demand. You know, those people who will come back and kind of trying to experience double the holidays, double the meals, double the activities that they've missed during this year. And I think going back to London being so vibrant and so kind of diverse, it will show a lot of activities coming back to the capital, if you like, and we see a lot of the things that are happening in on the seaside in Bournemouth. We are predicting a very good summer this summer. Last summer was incredibly good. So whenever it was not, whenever we are not on lockdown, actually Bournemouth did fantastically well. And I was talking to colleagues and friends in hotels in Bournemouth and in New Forest, and again the same kind of situation, that they're expecting all these people to come out and celebrate the end of this war. Effectively, it's a war. It's nothing less than a war. Chris, would you like to make a contribution, then go around?
Yeah.
One more time?
Well, as first of all, I was thinking as someone who uses Rob's hotels quite a lot, that I'm waiting for them to open as well as soon as possible, so when I can come up to London and also use some of Tony's facilities at the same time. So I'm very much looking forward to that. COVID certification is an interesting one, not least because of the logistics of that. In terms of international travel, it is coming. There's virtually no pushback from it, and also it's as it was correctly said, we've had yellow fever, we had in the past, we had malaria certificates and so on. So there isn't quite the same degree of controversy in terms of civil liberties, because it's a question of entry requirements for a particular country. So it is happening. Certainly the UK government is already working on that basis. How it operates is a slightly different question, because the thing that we as an industry, both on the hospitality and the tourism side, need to avoid is a piecemeal solution with every single country going its own way. That would be absolutely catastrophic. You'd have 200 countries times 200 countries, all with different rules and requirements, and that's something that we need to avoid. So the need and the requirement that we desperately need to have is a common set of standards for what allows travel between countries, and the way that is likely to happen is going to be, certainly from a number of countries, is approved apps, perhaps such as the IATA one, which is already fully in train and has the advantage of having multiple countries signed up to the IATA system for air transport anyway. And then for that to run alongside passports. There is a reluctance to put them within passports because they can be scanned in other countries for that level of detail. But there is a probability that we will have something like that. Just to give some examples of the challenges that you have for the common set of standards, you'd have to define which vaccines are acceptable, whether it's one shot, whether it's two shots, whether you've had a booster, whether a PCR is acceptable if you don't, or whether a lateral flow test would be. If you fail a lateral flow test, do you then do a PCR? So there's all of this that's going on. And one of the particular difficulties that we're facing is that if you have multiple approaches from different ones, it's not just a question of how my country handles it, but if you go abroad and then you have a stopover somewhere else and you have a third country, and you might have those ever decreasing levels of complexity to what you're trying to do, and that's something that we badly need to avoid as a sector. And again, once you have that, then it can start coming to normal. And one of the things I suppose that we are seeing is there is a return to making bookings for long haul travel, not just short haul, towards the end of 2021 and 2022. And Rob, in particular, I'd be quite interested to know whether you're seeing a similar kind of a pattern that there's a significant group of people who are expecting some degree of normal international travel by next year.
Yeah, we haven't really seen it come through our numbers as yet. I think people are still a little bit reluctant to put pen to paper or to book that far out at this point in time. So it's a little bit early for us. We haven't seen it in the numbers, but you know, we certainly hope that's the direction of travel.
I was having a similar kind of webinar last night with Rhodes, and a lot of people in Greece are quite desperate for you guys to travel to Greece. So we accept bookings anytime, and it's really we are looking at all the epidemiological kind of situation to make sure that people can travel again. But yesterday also we heard about India, and we see the epidemiological loads in India going up, and the cases. I know Tony is very close to India, and he was just about to go out with the Prime Minister, I understand. So probably, Tony, you have got more information about what's happening. But I think what we need to recognize is that the whole world will need to go out together from that, because we are not safe until the vaccinations have progressed and we have managed to manage the virus globally. And I think it's our responsibility as well to make sure that the developing world is also covered by vaccinations, and we're in a position to be able to have immunity throughout the world. Tony?
Yeah, well, I agree with that. I started at the beginning by talking about how we're all interconnected individually and collectively, how governments are, how nation states are, and that is absolutely the case. We are individually and personally connected with every other person on the planet, because we're not safe until everybody's safe. I think that has now dawned on the leaders, and leaders now need to get together and collaborate in a way that was not happening 6 months ago, a year ago, when they were building walls and not bridges, when there was sort of this isolationist view of life. I think that now is changing, and I'm glad for that. And I'm glad for anything that our government is going to do and has done in order to try to encourage people to partner and collaborate, whether it is on science and medicine, and test, track and trace and vaccines, or politically. But we need to do that. If we just step back, I remember that at one of the first speeches I made at the Bournemouth University events in one of my hotels, I talked about security as being the most important thing from the World Travel and Tourism Council. We weren't thinking pandemics in those days. We were thinking about bombs going off in the underground, planes flying into office buildings in New York, and so on. Things happening in attacks in Madrid, in Belgium, in Nice, and elsewhere. This pandemic has probably accentuated the fact that security, in this case, the health of our individuals and our nations, is more important than any other thing. And so if we regard this pandemic and this virus as being a security issue, it does mean, rather like other people that are planting germ warfare, it has to be regarded across all nations and across all leaderships, and it has to be confronted together. And I worry about that, because at the same time as we are discussing how we can individually and collectively help a city, London, help a nation, the United Kingdom, help Europe, help the members of the Pater, at the very same time, there is a potential for thousands of acres, literally millions of trees to be broken, and to create an airport in a country that doesn't need it, bringing man and mankind and animals closer together, which was the actual cause of the pandemic. So we've mentioned sustainability sort of in a passing sense, but actually what we really must do is make sure that this doesn't happen again. And nobody's really talking too much about prevention, but that is where we need to be, because this won't be the only pandemic, and it will mutate. We will need to find solutions globally with our leaders, with us as the public, and making sure that our voices are heard to those that can make change, that these things don't happen in the future. And that would be, I think, the best outcome of this. In the short term, we need to try to help our economies to recover, that can continue to employ people, that deals with the backlog, whether it's cancer or other medical treatments, or to do with making sure that city centres are generating income and supporting the Treasury so they can support businesses elsewhere in the country and other industries that perhaps have been more disproportionately affected.
Thank you, Tony. I know that Adele had a couple of questions.
Thank you, Dimitrios. I was really thinking that we should probably start turning towards the future, but just before I do that, Chris, you were talking about the COVID certification, and you probably can't see the chat, but there's a message in there from one of our students, and it says that people might feel more comfortable if it's not called a COVID passport. The word passport makes people feel uncomfortable, and she's had that conversation with a lot of people. So I think that's a really interesting point, that, you know, there does need to be a marketing job done on this, doesn't there, for it to be effective, as well as all of the other things that you've suggested, because people are fearful of the terminology and what that means.
Yeah, I think she's spot on. I think she's exactly right. Yeah, it's a media term and we kind of use it forgetfully, but it's exactly right. Calling it a passport it came about because it was initially talked about for travel internationally across borders. So it's understandable as a shorthand. But in fairness, the government avoid calling it a COVID passport as much as they just refuse to, unless our Prime Minister has a slip of the tongue. But as a general rule, they avoid it too, for exactly those reasons.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you. So can we turn to the future now, please, and maybe start off again with Tony, because you were talking about some of the lessons learned and where you feel this is heading for London.
Yes, I think that we need to avoid complacency, and that is us individually in the way in which we go about making our choices in life, and particularly our leaders. And what I fear is that we won't have understood carefully enough what caused this pandemic. We won't have identified how we could have shut it down quicker, either in wherever it started or the way in which it was transmitted, and at borders, and contained it at early stage. So that, I think, is important, that we need to prevent it in the very first place. But if it does start, we need to make sure that we can clamp down on it very quickly. I think that will give us the confidence globally that whatever happens of a similar nature, that it won't have the kind of impact that it's had across the globe up to now. If I just go back to sort of a more micro level, and my business in London, we need to collaborate together. All the different partners and composite parts of London, the attractions, the theatres, the arts, the events, the sport, big business and small business. We need to start stimulating a recovery. It's okay for big businesses to say, go work from home, because they can save 30% off their bottom line. But if working from home X number of days means on the Y couple of days that they do come back, they'll miss their coffee, they'll miss their dry cleaner, they'll miss the friendly face, they'll miss the meeting space, they'll miss the hotel environment, they'll miss many things that the hospitality sector has led on in the past, if they don't support it now. And what could be a short-sighted action by people who will disguise things as being sort of risk-averse or compliance, actually is saving on the bottom line because they don't need so much floor space. I understand that particularly the PLCs have got shareholders to satisfy, but they need to look broader at what kind of London, what kind of city, what kind of country, what kind of hospitality sector, and what kind of opportunity they want for their children and their grandchildren in the future, because it won't happen if we don't work collectively and in collaboration and in partnership. Fortunately, I can say that in Central London and with the Central London Alliance, I'm seeing, excuse me, all parties of all shapes and sizes across the board, from all organisations that only use railway arches for their businesses, excuse me, to the very biggest businesses, working together to try to stimulate the recovery. And as far as the other partners are concerned, TfL and Transport for London, and Network Rail and the rail networks, and all the other organisations that have got spare capacity. LNER, for example, a partner of the Central London Alliance, they've got seats and capacity that are coming to London empty. It's no good for them. Just as JCDecaux or radio stations or other media have got assets that are being underutilised, as have hotels and bars and restaurants. So we all work together on that, utilising the capacity that's spare, trying to encourage and work together in partnership. I'd urge everybody again to look at London Love Affair and just load it on your messaging. You can utilise it, doesn't cost anything. And that will stimulate the kind of sentiment that we're all in it together. And that's what's needed for London in the short term, manifesting itself in an increased trade, which we have facilitated through a platform. So every business can talk to each other. They can provide employee benefits and so on, all on a single platform that CLA provides. And that's to encourage trade and working together. And that's what's needed, I think, more broadly.
Thank you, Tony. That's really, really interesting. I think you're absolutely right. Collaboration and working together is the key. Can I turn to Rob and ask you the same question, please? Apart from lots of weddings, what's in it next for Best Western?
Well, I think there's other pockets of opportunity that exist in hospitality now. We've got a number of our owners who are looking at alternative uses. And that's a reality. That's not a good reality for me at Best Western, because they will take the badge off the front door and repurpose, whether it be apartments, whether it be medical facilities. There is a small element of that. It's a pretty small element at the moment, but it has potential to grow. But I think in trying to be optimistic about things, the reality is, through the crisis, we've all taken a fine-tooth comb to every line of the profit and loss statement of our businesses, and we've all slimmed down to a much more economically viable business models. And as we come out of this, for business owners now, I'm talking about, for business owners, there's an opportunity to come out the other side of this. Whenever it recovers, we can't predict that. It's a bit of crystal balling, but when it does recover, that we come out the other side of this as much more efficient businesses. Whether that's not using a particular agency we used to use, whether that's renegotiating, or right now at this moment in time, renegotiating all our wholesale foods and drink deals and things like that, and linen deals, and there's some significant savings in the market at the moment. So I think as we come out and we return to some level of normality and start to build that up, if we can be disciplined as businesses, there's an opportunity to come out the other side with improved margins. So I think that's one of the focuses, I think, for business owners at the moment, is to really consider, in a world past, we used to call it creep. What creep do we want coming into our P&L as we grow the revenues, and how much do we want to retain as profit? So profit retention, I think, will be a really important element over the next 3 to 5 years, as businesses start to, or attempt to pay back the volumes of debt that they've taken on, which is enormous. Unprecedented levels of debt exists in the businesses. So I think there are pockets of opportunity coming out that exist. Some people will think about alternative use. I think on the other side, there'll be people who'll ride this out and manage their businesses efficiently. And you know, and hopefully in a few years' time, I know, Chris, you mentioned before the road to recovery. You like to think about it each year, but I think you know, we are looking to get back to anywhere near 2019. We probably are looking at 2023, 2024, and that's the reality of it. But if we can do that, keeping some of the things that we've adopted through the crisis, then we can actually come out the other side of this in a really good shape.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, really interesting. And as you say, not all negative, but and I think the point has been, you know, made by all of you elsewhere, that it's not the same for everybody, is it? So I think, you know, individually there are different ways and means through this, and some will be able to recover, and sadly others won't. But yes, thank you. Any reflections, Chris, on that?
You was just listening to it. I mean, to an extent, for an awful lot of sectors, that if they're still here, then they've done well, because they've survived one of the worst times that we could possibly imagine. I do wonder sometimes that because you've had so many lockdowns, so many different restrictions, whether people are entirely aware of what has been and what is going to be lost, particularly in the cities in different countries. And when people start getting out there and looking at it, then the gaps will start to become apparent. I hope that causes exactly what Tony asked for, which is everybody to get out there and to use things. I know certainly just purely on a personal level, that I'm acutely conscious of making sure that if there's, where I live, if there's a shop that has a particular thing, go there and get it, rather than ordering it on Amazon and sitting home and waiting for it. All of that kind of personal actions that we can take that will help. And going forward, I mean, one of the things which I think that is going to be a challenge for us as an industry is to explain to everybody that as things do pick up again, that doesn't mean that we're all of a sudden we're making money. I mean, Rob talked about the accrued debt, which is just terrifying for everybody. It is going to be years before, as industries, as an overall, we break even again. We might be generating cash at some point in the future, but the debt is so large that there needs to be, hopefully, some patience from everybody for an understanding of how long it's going to take us all to recover. We're hoping for brighter days so that we can see our way through it. It doesn't mean that we've got there or that we expect to get there in the next few months.
Yes, thank you. Really, really interesting. And particularly, as you say, you know, I feel on a personal level almost the same. It's almost, I'm wondering what's left. You know, we can go out now, we can go and do things again, but part of me fears going out and finding things dramatically altered. And certainly living on the edges of a small town, you know, a lot of things have just not survived. And I think that's something that we will have to adjust to. So thank you very much. Do you want to do questions now, Dimitrios? Do you think we're there yet?
We can do, and we'll always take questions. So I haven't got anything on the chat here, but I think based on a conversation I had probably 2 or 3 weeks ago with Tony, is that there are lots of opportunities out there for innovation. And there are a lot of opportunities for people who would like to do things differently. So I keep saying to people, we shouldn't be looking to go back to 2019, but we should be looking forward to go to 2021, 22, 23, and ultimately 2030. Because a lot of the things that we're doing in 2019, we probably are not very proud of, or we are not. 2019 was not the perfect kind of situation. And I think a lot of the things that we should be doing in tourism and hospitality in London and around the world will actually come from innovations from the new people, the young people that have got new ideas, that they've got technology embedded into everything that they do, and the way that we engage with designing the experience of customers to actually bring individualization, personalization, contextualization out to a degree that we can really enjoy all the resources. We can really see the little corners of London. I was going London the other day with a friend of mine that he was showing me things that I've never seen in London before, you know, and it's all of those kind of intimate information and experience that they can come out. And I think we have sufficient time now and technology to actually bring them forward with you would expect me to say that with 5G having much faster, much more reliable kind of information, we should designing experiences that on impulse, that they are taking advantage of real time and engage all the facilities that we've got in hospitality and tourism to blend with the communities and leave the vibrant kind of city as we are. Tony, I know that we've discussed this before, and you were telling me that some of the initiatives that you would like to start in your businesses.
Yeah, sure. I mean, all of your students will not remember, and I suspect that perhaps Chris and Rob won't either. But there was a time before the internet and before emails when people walked out of railway stations and airports with their bag, which didn't have wheels on, and try to find a place to stay, or they looked it up in a guidebook, a physical book, and identified a place and rang them, or wrote to them by pigeon post, and organised their accommodation that way. And then they used travel agents that were physical shops on high street. So this is what used to happen, and nobody could have envisaged that the impact that technology and communication has had since that time. And we have been the innovators, I think, in travel and tourism and in hospitality, in utilising new methods of communication in order to make the journey from deciding what you want to do and where you want to do it, and then booking it and securing it, and then arriving and perhaps not even necessarily needing to use anything else but your mobile phone in order to get access to it. We have innovated and led on that, and I think that will continue. I personally am going to be recruiting many more people to work in my digital space, creatives and innovators, young people who know that world probably better than I do, simply because that's the way the market is moving, and because I've had in the past the ability to identify good talent and leverage their knowledge and expertise in order to drive my businesses forward. So I'll continue to do that. And with a CRM tool called Optimizer, which helps people manage their data better. It's a global thing. It's not specifically for hospitality. It can be used for anybody. What we have found is that people working remotely, they need to engage with their head offices and with each other, and they need to get access to data in a sensible way that isn't in cardboard boxes under desks or left in the office. They need to be able to communicate much better, know who's talking to who, where, when, how, what the actions are that are coming out of that, and to measure the impact of their activities. That all of that is now needed in a remote world, and I think people have perhaps recognised that in all businesses. So that I see as being fertile ground for not only for expansion and growth, and not just in the UK or hospitality industry, but actually everywhere. That recognition is there, and I think that is an area where the young talented people can exploit that, those fertile grounds to expand their career, and I'll certainly be doing that. One of the things that's not been said is about, I know that there's been a sort of general statement, excuse me, that when in a crisis comes opportunity. 44% of people who own hospitality sites apparently plan to open new sites. So some people, maybe in Bournemouth, maybe in Cornwall, Devon, maybe in staycation locations, have done well and are looking to expand. That London and the urban centres, that is in sharp contrast. That isn't reflected in the city centres. But that means that there may be, where people fail, opportunities for others to exploit. I don't really like that word, exploit, but to be encouraged to invest. But that does need a whole range of different partners. It needs banks to be supportive and to give the confidence and think and be patient. It does need patient capital in order for that to happen. You can't design, build, operate, and manage a hotel in the short term. These are long-term plans that others and the financiers and investment funds have got to understand. And at a smaller level, those people that have provided the coffee bars and the cobblers and the dry cleaners and the laundries and all the other activities and the attractions and the transporters, all of those have got to survive in order for us to survive. So I'm hoping that will create some opportunities for employment. Certainly, we didn't close at all during the pandemic. We're not closed now, albeit it was for blue light, key workers and others that were self-isolating and so on. We're expecting, we did that largely to retain our employees, and we want to retain as many as we can and get others to return and start to work. You may find that certainly I heard it mentioned that that there are some businesses that are reopening now that have found that their employees, having been furloughed for a long time, perhaps from Australasia, that went home and not coming back, and actually the furlough didn't necessarily encourage retention. So there is going to be a bit of wastage in that sense, and it may be that others that have disappeared are not coming back in the same numbers, but that may in itself create opportunities for the indigenous population to educate themselves and perhaps change their career path and find a place with low barriers to entry, like the hospitality and travel sector, and where we can create careers for young people who are innovative and a faster rate of growth than nearly every other industry that I know. So there is some room for optimism.
Absolutely. And I think we'll see a lot of the, what I used to say to my students is that a lot of the jobs that they'll exist in 3 to 4 years, they never existed 5 years before. And I think it's really about looking into how we can bring together the talent, and the youth and the technology and all of those things, and blend it with experienced business people to take things forward. And another thing that we've learned in the last few months is that people start realizing that they do not need so much material, but they would like to have a better, rewarding, transformative kind of experiences. How many pairs of shoes would you like to have in the cupboard? And I think that is also a fantastic opportunity for us as that kind of industry to bring it out, and especially when you're dealing with places like London, where you've got so much, so many resources and so many different things, there are incredible opportunities to actually create those transformative experiences. Chris, Rob, would you like to come into that?
I don't mind which order. Okay, I'll go let Rob after. Yes, I have. If there's one thing of which I have no doubt, is the absolute faith in people who run businesses and people who work in businesses and young people as they grow up, in their brilliance and willingness to adapt. And no matter what the circumstances are at the moment, people will respond to that. People will come back to it. There are going to be some changes. I was just thinking about, in terms of the medium term for our travel side of things, multi-center trips, that's gone for a while. And certainly across different countries. If you think about people from the Far East or from Australia saying, I'm going to go around Europe and take in 10 countries, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for a little while. So you'll have that focus. Now that is an opportunity for example, the United Kingdom, who's looking at those people when they can travel here, and saying, well, okay, you would have gone around Europe. How about staying here longer and increasing the dispersal rate for UK tourism? So there are always ways of looking at this. I kind of think about with people who I know who set up businesses recently during the pandemic, and coming up with things. There's a good friend of mine who lost his job in freight forwarding. He now makes bagels at home, and he's doing brilliantly at it. So people respond. He's a young guy, people respond, people do things. That is not going to change. The brilliance of human beings is not going to change. is not going to be easy. There are going to be losses. There are going to be things that we can't do as well as we could do before. But over time, even some of those might come back. But you know, it's always something that we're facing the particular situation that we are at the moment, and we have done over the last 12 months. But that doesn't mean that we can't improve things going forward. There will be some changes. I was thinking actually in terms of travel and tourism, something that every single one of us is guilty of, which is that we all want to go to the great sites of the world, but we don't want any other tourists to go there. Now is your opportunity. There might be some difficulty in traveling, but if people who love going to see these things and going to travel, now is the time to go. It'll be quiet. So that is an opportunity in itself, and those are the kind of people that we perhaps need to target.
Absolutely, and that's domestic and international as well.
Yeah,
because there's so many areas where we can enjoy, and under normal circumstances, we wouldn't have the time or wouldn't have the capacity to actually do it. Rob?
Yeah, thanks. I agree with the sentiment of Chris and Tony. The brilliance of people has shone through the crisis, and just a couple of examples in Best Western. We had one of our hotels turn their entire breakfast room into a 3D printing centre through the crisis, and they printed plastic face shields for the NHS. And they had 6 machines running at one stage. They didn't even know how to use them. The father and son went out and were taught how to use it. The local community donated a lot of the materials and the machines to do it. And those sort of stories, there's just a dime a dozen amongst the hotel industry of all the different brands. Just some incredible stories about people who have taken in, whether it's homeless people, domestic violence victims, just the humanity and the brilliance of our people in hospitality, and that will stay. If anything, it's shone through the crisis. So you know, those sort of stories are really heartwarming, and just give you a sense of optimism for the future that you know, we'll come out the other side of this. You know, we'll be all the better for the experience, and you know, at some point in time, we'll recover from the debt that we've racked up, and the industry will be once again a really exciting and fertile ground for anyone thinking about a bright career in an industry that you can go anywhere in the world in. So really exciting times, I think, to be entering the industry. It will only get better from here. We have bottomed out, let's hope. We have bottomed out, and we are on the road to recovery, and it's a great time to get into the industry.
Absolutely. And I'm trying to remember the name of this restaurant in London that I think it's Nepalese restaurant that did 100,000 meals for NHS and for a lot of other organizations. And it's a little place. I'll find the name because I'm following them on Instagram and on different things. That they put all their mission in actually doing that. And I know that Tony has done incredible work for solidarity for many people in need, and a lot of other colleagues. And I think we're very, very proud of the industry. We've done an hour and a half of talking, and I think we are kind of getting towards the end of our session. I'd like to invite your last thoughts on how we can take things forward. And just before I was doing that, Gordon says the Brexit situation and the needs for London to reinvent itself. I think we haven't really seen Brexit yet, and we haven't seen it because we've been hiding with COVID. But I guess a lot of people, as we are reopening restaurants and bars and hotels, they'll realize that a lot of the European employees who are furloughed, they've gone back to Europe, and I think that will have an issue on the labor market. And I cannot talk about the labor market in the presence of Adele because she is the expert on this. But it's a good opportunity to talk about that for a minute. And thank you, Gordon, for reminding us. Tony, Rob, would you like to pick up on the Brexit situation, which we haven't necessarily explored because of COVID?
Well, we can't afford to be complacent. And I think that much of the damage from Brexit is not revealed itself because, as you're right, it's hidden in the in this pandemic crisis. But trade has been affected, and mobility has been affected of labour and of goods. Perhaps, you know, I don't want to get political on this, but what we wouldn't want is the breakup of the union, and issues with Northern Ireland to be converted into a Scottish independence and so on. Remember what I said about security. We work much better together and collaboratively than we do when we're independent and self-isolating. So I think that is the biggest impact. What I think is of real concern to me, again, looking at it globally, is that our country has had a reputation, deservedly so, for being empathetic and considerate and kind and generous and hospitable. And that helps our industry. That's what we do as hospitality. And we have soft power that is unrivaled in anywhere else in the world, at least we had. And that must be retained in the way in which we interact with other countries and other nations, and the way in which we want to do business with them. So if nothing else, then whether it be Brexit or whether it be in other kinds of negotiation on sustainability, on environmental sensitivities, whether it be on the percentage of GDP that we should be delivering to those countries that are poorer, not just for economic reasons, because they will be markets for our goods and services, but because it's a good thing to do. There's no point on an individual level to be standing on our doorstep and clapping our hands at the nurses that we now value and see them as key, and ignore them at some time in the future. And I don't think that we can afford, as a nation and as the greatest global capital city in the world, to be negligent and complacent. So we must avoid complacency. And if that means that we've got to find ways of working with Europe, ways of trading with Europe, ways of trading with other nation states, then we find a way. There's always a solution. And talking is much better than not talking. The pandemic should have told us that we are connected and interrelated, every nation and every individual. And hopefully some of the fears about Brexit will not manifest themselves in this sort of isolationist approach. And mine is bigger than yours kind of grandstanding. We now need to work together, whether you're creating vaccines, whether we're finding test, track and trace and self-isolation methodology, whether it's PPE, it doesn't matter actually. We are all united in common humanity. That this demonstrates itself on the doors when we clap, when we use our local service providers, and we provide employment, and we shouldn't forget that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Rob, Chris?
Rob, do you want to go first, this one?
You go.
Okay. You know, about sort of 2 years ago, something like that, and I was asked to deliver an address to the board of Paterson International, the head office. And yeah, sure, no problem whatsoever. What subject would you like? I said, oh, can you talk about Brexit? And I'm sure that I kind of speak for many of us, where your face falls and you're, oh God, not again. And if there's one thing that I suppose that I've learned from this as a representative of an organization that is determined to be neutral on it, is that an awful lot of the approaches that people have to it come from the position of what their view was when they voted, whichever way, and then, you know, backing it up from that in terms of what we will face and what we won't face. I don't know. But what I will say is that the government have made a big thing of the whole concept of global Britain recently. And one of the things that we have been talking, the travel trade rather, I'm not talking about I have Boris's phone number. One of the things that the travel trade has been trying to make clear to the government is if they want global Britain to be a reality, as opposed to just a slogan, then they are going to have to back that up, whether that be on the outbound tourism side or the inbound tourism side, or all of the ancillary industries that go with that, whether that be hospitality, whether that be the arts, whether that would be anything which is reliant on our international links. So that is their challenge, and they need to back that up, and they need to make sure that that is what happens. And then if it does, then we have opportunities within that.
Absolutely. Rob?
Yeah, from a practical standpoint, the biggest concern we had around Brexit internally was around supplies and goods, and we started to put a whole heap of planning in place, and of course the world changed, and whilst we felt it to some degree, you know, there were certain products even before the official cutover time, things like plasterboard. There was a bunch of practical items that we really struggled to get, but I don't think we've really felt the full, we haven't fully understood that yet. And as we get up and trading again, we might start to understand that. But for me, we are where we are, and it's, you know, start with what you've got. There's a pretty simple sort of approach to things. I think we are where we are, and we've just got to make the most of the situation that we're in, and make it work for the country. I know it sounds really, boils it down to a really simplistic view, but it is reality. We can sort of sit here and focus on the past and be, you know, upset about this or that, or we didn't get this or we didn't get that. And, you know, it's just not going to help at this point in time. I think it's just we've got to make the most of the situation and try to keep, as Tony said, keep the channels open for communication, because we're going to be stronger together particularly coming out of the crisis. So
Absolutely.
It's difficult because we haven't really felt the impact of it yet.
And I think when you're looking to leadership, there are two types of people, especially in crisis. The people that they are waiting to be saved, and the people who are getting into gear to help and to do things. I'd like to show you something, and I'll try to share my screen for a minute, because I think this is the opportunity to celebrate London. This is the restaurant I talked to you about. It's called the Panas restaurant, and it's these guys. It's a Panas Indian and Gurkha restaurant in Blackheath in London that specializes on Nepalese and Indian cuisine. And this is the day that they celebrated 100,000 meals. This is a small restaurant. It's a small feast, and these guys, and if you're looking at their Facebook, they've got all these kind of wonderful pictures of donating food and organizing an incredible way of delivering supplies to people. And I think this is exactly what we need to be celebrating. I promise you, this is going to be one of the first restaurants I'm going to visit when the lockdown is over. It's called the Panas restaurant in Blackheath in London. Please go and support them, because they are supporting us, we are supporting them. That's about solidarity. That's about how we're getting together and how we can take things forward. I'd like to kind of bring this to a close. 1 minute for each of you to kind of bring your thoughts together and how we can take London forward to the new era that is coming, and an optimistic kind of message on how we are be in a better situation in the future. Tony?
Thank you, and thanks everybody for allowing me this opportunity. You just gave an example of one public-spirited community entity that was part of a community and that was helping to rebuild something for those that were in need. That's exactly where we need to be in the future. We need to be community-spirited. We need to be thinking about recovery and rebuilding, replenishing and helping those people to survive, and enabling and stimulating them to produce and be more productive in the future, whether that's as an individual employee, as an employer, as a business organisation like the London Chamber of Commerce or business improvement districts, or as a government, as a nation. That rebuilding, it starts on an individual level, it grows, and we mustn't be the avoidance of complacency that this can't happen again, or we've got through that by the skin of our teeth, we must avoid that. We must focus on what was the cause, and we must avoid the causes and plan better for what might happen in the future. But it starts on an individual basis, and it ends with us as all part of a global community with empathy and consideration and kindness to other people.
Thank you very much, Tony. Absolutely. Chris?
I'm not sure I can top that. I think what he said was quite spot on. Yes, I mean, we will get through this. We will recover this. London has always been one of the great global cities anyway. There are a huge number of people all around the world who are desperate to come to it and will want to. And it is up to us to make the most of that when it happens, and not just London, actually, for the whole of the UK and also for other countries anywhere around the world, to make the most of what is coming. None of us expected this. We all have gone through a dreadful year where we're not sure, but now, as we come through this, there are opportunities and we can make the most of them, but it's up to us ultimately.
Absolutely. And what is obvious, what became absolutely apparent is how interlinked we are globally, and how absolutely every society is linked to another one. Rob?
Yeah, just to echo the comments already made, and just to say, I think just optimistic and excited about welcoming back our staff and our guests. It starts pretty soon, actually. We've got Scotland opening up next week, and of course England in a few weeks, and already Wales is starting to do some domestic travel. So just optimistic about that future, and also optimistic that science has won, and the brilliance of all the companies behind the vaccines. There's a lot to be optimistic about, that humanity won, and we're coming out the other side of this. So yeah, just optimism for the future.
Thank you very much. Let me thank all of you for contributing, and I'll leave the last word with Adele. I open it, and Adele will be much better qualified to actually bring it all together.
I'm not sure about that, but thank you. And I was going to say to ask the three of you if you could finish with some words of encouragement for our students, but actually I don't think we need to, because there's been lots of very positive messages, and I think throughout there's been consideration and encouragement for many of our bright young talent who are listening with us today. So thank you very much for doing this. As educators, we've also found similar challenges, and we've had to adapt and do things quite differently. And I have to say, one of the positives is we've been able to, to see more of people, even in the virtual world, that we wouldn't have been able to do without. So it's been really great, and thank you for sharing and coming together and sharing your experiences and taking the time to do that with us for yet another Zoom meeting, which I'm sure we're tired of, and we'll be very glad when hotels are open again and we can start travelling. But if I could just lend my thanks along with Dimitrios for your support, and thank you students for listening, and I hope that's been really useful to you and certainly got our minds thinking about London, and more importantly also the world beyond. And thank you, Dimitrios, as ever, for pressing the right buttons.
Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay strong, and hopefully we'll meet together very, very soon. And we'll take London, the UK, and the world forward to a better world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.